Ancient Egypt, a land of grandeur, power, and fear. A kingdom where the Nile flows like a lifeblood, and Pharaoh's word is law. But beneath the weight of an empire there exists another story, a story of oppression, of slaves bound by cruel chains. And in the midst of this darkness, a child is born. Jochebed, a Hebrew woman, gives birth to a son. Her heart is filled with love, but also with terror. Pharaoh's decree is clear. Every Hebrew boy must die. The cries of newborns echo through the land, but Jochebed's son, her little Moses, will not meet this fate, not today. With trembling hands, Jochebed makes a decision no mother should ever have to make. She places her son in a basket crafted from reeds and sets it afloat on the Nile River. The water, calm and treacherous, carries him away, a desperate hope for salvation. She watches him drift, her heart breaking, but trusting in a God she cannot yet see. The basket moves silently along the river, an innocent child floating amidst the rush of life. And then, as if the hand of destiny has reached down, Pharaoh's daughter of the very king who seeks the boy's life, finds the child. Her eyes fall upon him, and her heart softens. She does not see a threat. She sees a baby in need of a mother. She lifts him from the waters, his cries filling the air, and in that moment, Moses is saved. Pharaoh's daughter, defying her father's will, decides to raise the child as her own, a prince in the palace of the very man who ordered his death. But while Moses is embraced by the riches of the royal court, the truth of his heritage is not forgotten. He is a Hebrew child, born to a people enslaved by the Egyptians. The riches of the palace are his, but so too are the cries of his people. A question stirs within him, though he is too young to fully understand it. What is a prince to do when he knows his brothers and sisters suffer for his luxury? Moses grows, not knowing the weight of his true identity, but there is something within him, a stirring of justice, a whisper of destiny. His childhood, bathed in luxury, cannot erase the truth of his birth, and soon the world will learn that Moses, the Prince of Egypt, is not just a man of privilege. He is a man of purpose. The river that carried him to safety will soon carry him into a future no one could have predicted. As Moses grows, so does the complexity of his life. The years pass, and the boy who was once a helpless infant in a basket has now become a young man, raised as a prince in the palace of Pharaoh himself. Egypt's wealth surrounds him, golden treasures, opulent feasts, and the finest education. He is the son of Pharaoh's daughter, privileged, powerful, and destined for greatness. But despite the luxury that fills his days, something within Moses stirs, an inner conflict that cannot be ignored. He is a Hebrew by birth, a child of slaves, yet he is treated as royalty. He wears the robes of a prince, but his heart aches for the people of his blood. The Egyptian court is filled with grand celebrations, but Moses does not find joy in the wealth and power that others crave. He spends his days in the royal halls, learning the ways of leadership, military strategy, and the great history of Egypt. His mind sharpens, his understanding deepens, but so does his sense of unease. He watches from his high vantage point, looking down upon the Hebrew slaves working tirelessly in the fields below, the same people he belongs to, the same people he feels connected to, yet separated by the walls of the palace. It is during these moments that the question becomes louder. Who is he? What is his place in this world? Is he truly an Egyptian prince, or is he something more, a man caught between two worlds, belonging to neither? One day Moses leaves the palace, walking among the Israelites. His eyes scan the faces of his people, their exhaustion written in every line of their faces. He sees their pain, their suffering, and his heart swells with empathy. This is his blood. These are his brothers and sisters, and then, in a single fateful moment, everything changes. Moses sees an Egyptian overseer, cruel and merciless, beating a Hebrew slave. His anger boils over, his emotions flood his heart, and before he can stop himself, he strikes. The overseer falls to the ground, lifeless. In an instant, Moses' life is shattered. He looks down at the body of the Egyptian, the weight of what he has done crashing down upon him. Fear grips him, for he knows that Pharaoh's wrath is swift and unforgiving. The man he has killed represents everything Moses has tried to distance himself from: the cruel face of Egypt, the oppressive force that rules his people. But the consequence of his act will now force him to confront everything he has avoided. Moses flees into the desert, running from the life he thought he knew, running from the man he thought he was. The Egyptian palace, the royal courts, the comforts of the world he once knew, all of it is behind him now. Exile, this is his punishment, a life of solitude in the wilderness, far from the life he was born to live. The desert is a vast and unforgiving place. Days stretch into weeks, and weeks into months. Moses wanders, a man lost not only in the wilderness, but in his own soul. The life he had built for himself is gone, and he must now face the reality of who he truly is. But in the desert, amidst the harshness of the environment, Moses finds something unexpected: peace. He encounters a new life, a new identity. He meets the priest of Midian, Jethro, and marries his daughter Zipporah. For the first time in years, Moses finds a semblance of belonging. He becomes a shepherd, a man of the land, tending to the flock. He no longer wears the robes of royalty, but the simple garments of a shepherd, living a humble existence far from the grandeur of Egypt. In this quiet life, Moses begins to heal. But even as he tends his sheep under the vast desert sky, he knows this is not his final destiny. The world he fled may seem far behind, but the echoes of his people, the cries of the Hebrews, never leave him. He is a man who is searching for meaning, for purpose, and perhaps most of all, for forgiveness. The Prince of Egypt has become a humble shepherd, but something stirs within him, something he cannot escape. The wilderness, vast and empty as it may seem, holds the key to Moses' true calling, and soon that calling will find him. Years pass, and Moses, now a shepherd in the wilderness of Midian, has found a life of simplicity. He tends his flock, follows the rhythms of nature, and carries the weight of his past in silence. The great city of Egypt is but a distant memory, and Moses has all but forgotten his place in the world. But God does not forget. It is here, in the solitude of the desert, that Moses encounters something beyond explanation, something that will change the course of his life and the lives of millions to come. One ordinary day, as the sun burns hot in the sky, Moses leads his sheep to the foot of Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. It is here that Moses notices something strange, something impossible: a bush engulfed in flames, yet not consumed by the fire. The flames dance in the air, but the bush remains unscathed, untouched by the heat that should have destroyed it. Moses approaches, drawn by the mysterious sight, his curiosity overpowering any caution. And then, as he draws near, he hears a voice, clear, commanding, yet gentle. The voice calls his name. Moses, Moses. Moses stops in his tracks, his heart racing. Who could it be? And then, from the flames, the voice speaks again. Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. In a daze, Moses obeys, removing his sandals, his eyes wide with fear and awe. His mind struggles to grasp what is happening. This is no ordinary moment. This is not a dream. This is not a vision. This is real. And then The voice speaks once more. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses falls to his knees, trembling. His life, his identity, has just collided with a power greater than anything he has ever known. The God of his ancestors, the God of Israel, has called him by name. But with this revelation comes a command, a mission that Moses cannot possibly understand. I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The words echo in Moses' ears, but he cannot process them. What is God asking him? So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. The words hit Moses like a thunderclap. He stumbles back, his breath catching in his throat. This is impossible. He is a humble shepherd, nothing more. He is no leader, he is no prince. He has no power, no voice. How can God possibly ask him to confront Pharaoh, the most powerful man on earth? Moses' mind races. The doubts flood in, one after another. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? The question hangs in the air, heavy and full of fear. Moses knows his limitations. He knows the dangers. He knows the wrath of Pharaoh. He is a fugitive, a man with a past. He cannot escape. But God's response is simple, yet profound. I will be with you. Moses' heart falters. That was not the answer he expected. He had asked, "Who am I?" And God had responded, "I will be with you." The promise is clear. Moses is not being asked to do this alone. But even with this reassurance, doubt still lingers in Moses' heart. How will he convince the Israelites? How will he convince Pharaoh? What if they don't believe him? What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, "The Lord did not appear to you"? Moses asks, his voice shaky with fear. God, with infinite patience, shows Moses 3 signs to prove his power. The staff in Moses' hand becomes a serpent, his hand becomes leprous, and then is healed. God shows Moses that he is the one in control, the one who commands all of creation. With these signs, Moses is given the power to convince both the Israelites and Pharaoh of God's presence. Still, Moses hesitates. "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." But God, undeterred, responds with a promise of his own. Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. Moses, overwhelmed and unsure, makes one final plea. "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." God's patience wears thin, but his call is unwavering. "What about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and you were God to him." Reluctantly, Moses accepts. God's will is clear, and though Moses' heart is filled with fear and doubt, he knows he must obey. "Take the staff in your hand," God commands, "for with it you will perform the signs." And so, with a heart heavy with uncertainty and a mind filled with questions, Moses sets off to fulfill the impossible task set before him, to confront Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of Egypt. His life, once simple and quiet, will never be the same again. The man who ran from his past is now called to face it. The man who doubted his own worth is now called to lead a nation to freedom. And in the desert, before the burning bush, Moses' journey of faith begins. This chapter brings the pivotal moment in Moses' life, where God calls him to a mission far beyond his own understanding and capabilities. With the weight of God's command on his shoulders, Moses returns to Egypt, the land he once fled in fear. The familiar sands of the desert now seem like a distant memory. His mission is clear, though the fear that gripped him in the wilderness still lingers in his heart. He is not the prince of Egypt anymore, nor the humble shepherd of Midian. He is a man called by God, but to fulfill that call, he must confront the one person he once tried to escape, the mighty Pharaoh. As Moses stands at the gates of Egypt, he knows that this is the moment of truth. The man who once wore the royal robes now stands as a messenger of the God of Israel, sent to free his people from the grip of an empire. But how can a fugitive, a simple man, demand the release of millions from the most powerful ruler in the world? Moses arrives in Egypt with his brother Aaron by his side, who will serve as his spokesperson. Together, they are to speak the words of the Lord to Pharaoh himself. They approach the royal court, where Pharaoh sits like a god among men, unaware that his world is about to be turned upside down. The throne room is grand, the air heavy with authority and arrogance. Pharaoh looks down on Moses, seeing nothing more than an exile who dares to challenge him. But Moses knows what is at stake. He knows that he is not speaking on his own behalf. He is the voice of God, and Pharaoh's fate, and the fate of Egypt, rests on his words. Moses steps forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh's eyes narrow, his lips curl into a disdainful smile. He looks at Moses and Aaron as though they are insignificant, no different than the countless petitions he's ignored in the past. Who are these two men to question his authority? "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go?" Pharaoh sneers. "I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Moses feels the weight of the refusal like a blow. He knows that this is only the beginning. He knows that Pharaoh's heart is hardened, but the words of the Lord are unwavering. Pharaoh will not relent, not now, not without a fight. And so begins the contest of wills. Moses and Aaron, armed with the power of God, standing against the pride and power of Egypt. God had warned Moses that Pharaoh's heart would be hardened, and Pharaoh's response is swift and brutal. In retaliation for Moses' request, Pharaoh commands the taskmasters to make the Hebrews work even harder. They are to gather their own straw for the bricks they make, but their quota remains the same. The Israelites are crushed beneath the burden of Pharaoh's cruelty. They are angry, confused, and they turn on Moses and Aaron. "May the Lord look upon you and judge you," the foremen cry. "You have made us a stench to Pharaoh and his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." The anger of the Israelites, the very people Moses has come to save, is now directed at him. His mission is beginning to look impossible. The more he obeys God, the worse things seem to get. Moses is filled with doubt, and in that moment, he turns to God, questioning his plan. "Why, Lord, have you brought trouble upon this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble upon this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." But God's response is firm and resolute. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, Pharaoh will drive them out of his country." God reminds Moses of his promise, the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he will deliver his people. And with renewed strength, Moses prepares for what is to come. The confrontation with Pharaoh is just beginning, and Moses must continue the task that God has set before him. God commands Moses to go back to Pharaoh once more, and so Moses, now with his faith fortified, returns to the palace. "This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, 'Let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness.'" Again Pharaoh refuses. "I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Moses' heart grows heavy, but he knows that this is only the beginning of a much greater struggle. For Pharaoh, a man so consumed with pride and arrogance, has no idea that he is about to face the full might of God. Moses has come in the name of the Lord, and what the Lord says will be done. The time for words has ended. It is time for the signs of God's power to be revealed to Egypt and the world. Moses stretches out his staff over the waters of the Nile, and the river turns to blood. The fish die, the water stinks, and the Egyptians are forced to dig for fresh water. But even in the face of such a sign, Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. This is just the beginning of what is to come. The plagues have begun, and Egypt is about to feel the wrath of God. As Moses stands before Pharaoh once more, he knows that this is not just a battle for the Israelites' freedom. It is a battle for the heart of Egypt itself. God's power will be shown. Pharaoh will be made to see that no one stands above the will of the Lord. And so the struggle continues. The plagues are unleashed. The might of God presses down upon Egypt, and Pharaoh's resolve will be tested like never before. This chapter captures Moses' return to Egypt, his first confrontation with Pharaoh, and the beginning of the battle for the Israelites' freedom. It sets the stage for the series of plagues and the ultimate showdown between Pharaoh's pride and God's power. The moment had arrived. After a series of devastating plagues sent by the hand of God, Pharaoh's stubborn heart remained unyielding. The land of Egypt was ravaged, its crops destroyed, its livestock dead, its people suffering. Yet still Pharaoh refused to listen. But the time had come for the final act. The last plague would not only break Pharaoh's will, it would break the chains that had bound the Israelites for centuries. God, in his mercy, had warned Pharaoh over and over, and now the final plague would come, the death of every firstborn in Egypt. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn of the lowliest servant, the penalty for Pharaoh's disobedience would be swift and devastating. But for the Israelites, God provides a way of protection. He commands them to prepare for the coming night with a ritual that would be remembered for generations, the Passover. Each family is to sacrifice a lamb without defect and spread its blood on the doorposts of their homes. When the angel of death passes over Egypt, it will see the blood and pass over those homes, sparing their children. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. That night, as the Israelites gather in their homes, their hearts are filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They have done as the Lord commanded, and now they wait. In the silence of the night, the cries of Egypt begin. It is the sound of mourning, fathers and mothers wailing for the children they have lost. Pharaoh's own son is taken, and in the depth of his grief, Pharaoh finally surrenders. "Get up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds and go." The command is swift and final. Egypt, broken by the weight of God's judgment, is now a place of mourning. But for the Israelites, the moment of deliverance has come. In the early hours of the morning, they begin to gather their things. No time to bake bread, no time to gather their belongings. They are to leave quickly, for Pharaoh has given them permission to go. The Israelites leave in haste, their hearts full of hope and uncertainty. They are free, but their journey is just beginning. The road ahead is unknown, and the wilderness awaits them. But in that moment, they are no longer slaves. They are a people on the move, heading to the land God promised them. As they leave the gates of Egypt, they are joined by a mixed multitude, those who had lived among them in Egypt, who now choose to follow the God of Israel. The air is thick with emotion as the Israelites walk away from the land that had held them in captivity for so long. God commands Moses to lead the people to the Red Sea, and he guides them with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. They are a people on a journey, led by the hand of God, and nothing will stand in their way. But Pharaoh, in his rage, cannot let go of what he has lost. He changes his mind. His pride cannot accept the loss of his workforce. He orders his army to pursue the Israelites, chasing them down with the full might of Egypt's military power. As the Israelites camp by the Red Sea, they look behind them and see the dust rising from the approaching Egyptian army. Fear grips their hearts. The water before them offers no escape, and the army behind them spells certain death. They begin to panic, crying out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?" Their faith falters, their hope begins to crumble. But Moses stands firm. He knows that God has led them to this place for a reason. He raises his hand over the sea and, at the command of God, stretches his staff over the waters. The sea parts, the waters separating like walls on either side. The Israelites walk through on dry ground, their feet stirring up the dust of the seabed as they cross to the other side. It is a miracle, a sign of God's power and his faithfulness to his people. But Pharaoh's heart remains hardened. The Egyptian army pursues, charging into the midst of the parted waters. But as soon as the last Israelite reaches the other side, Moses lifts his staff again, and the waters return. The entire Egyptian army is swallowed by the sea, drowning in the waters they had once pursued the Israelites through. The Israelites stand on the shore watching as the waters settle. The Egyptian army, once a symbol of their oppression, is now gone. In this moment, they are truly free. And they sing a song of victory, a song of deliverance, a song that will echo through generations. They sing of the Lord's strength, of his might, and of his faithfulness to his people. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. The Exodus is complete. The Israelites have left Egypt behind, but their journey is far from over. They are now a nation on the move, a people forged by the hand of God, and a people called to fulfill the promises made to their ancestors. The wilderness awaits them, a land of trials and miracles, a land that will test their faith and reveal the depths of God's power. But for now, they are free, and that freedom, paid for by the blood of the Lamb and sealed by the waters of the Red Sea, is theirs. This chapter captures the dramatic and miraculous escape of the Israelites from Egypt, focusing on the final plague, the Passover, the parting of the Red Sea, and the moment of freedom. The powerful imagery of the Red Sea parting and the Israelites' song of victory brings the story to a triumphant climax. The Israelites are free, finally free. The oppressive hand of Pharaoh is behind them, and ahead lies the Promised Land. But the journey to freedom is far from easy. The wilderness is vast, and the road to the land God promised them is long and uncertain. For 40 years, the Israelites will wander the deserts, and in that time their faith will be tested, their hearts will be stretched, and their trust in God will be challenged at every turn. The desert is unforgiving. The sun blazes down from above, and the barren landscape stretches as far as the eye can see. The Israelites, once slaves in Egypt, now find themselves in a strange new reality, no longer bound by chains, but still bound by their past fears and doubts. The promise of a new life feels distant, and the reality of the wilderness weighs heavy on their hearts. It doesn't take long before the grumbling begins. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, they cry. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all of the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." The complaints echo through the camp. The Israelites, freed from slavery, now find themselves longing for the comforts of their past, even if that past was one of oppression. But in the midst of their complaints, God hears their cries. He does not abandon them. Instead, He provides. "I will rain down bread from heaven for you," God tells Moses. "The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day." The next morning, the ground is covered with a strange, flaky substance, manna, the bread from heaven. The Israelites gather it just as they are told, and for the first time since leaving Egypt, they have enough to eat. But God's provision doesn't stop there. When they grow thirsty, He commands Moses to strike a rock, and from it, water flows, quenching their thirst in the dry desert. With every miracle, their faith is tested, and with every test, God provides. But despite His provision, the Israelites continue to doubt, continue to grumble. They wonder if they are truly in God's care. They question Moses, the man who led them out of Egypt, wondering why he has brought them into such a harsh wilderness. The journey grows harder. The people face more challenges, attacks from hostile nations, a lack of food and water, and the overwhelming fear of the unknown. They begin to lose hope, to wonder if this journey will ever end. They look back longingly at Egypt, their old life of oppression, and they begin to ask, why did we leave? Was it better to stay in slavery than to face death in the wilderness? Through it all, Moses remains steadfast, trusting in God's promises, even when the people do not. His leadership is tested as never before. And God, in His wisdom, gives Moses a solution. He appoints leaders to help him carry the burden of guiding the people. The elders of Israel are appointed to help judge disputes, and Moses can focus on his true calling, leading the people to the promised land. But despite the new structure, the Israelites' faith continues to falter. And in their time of rebellion, when they construct a golden calf and turn to idol worship, Moses' patience is tested to its limits. When Moses comes down from the mountain after receiving God's commandments, he sees the people dancing around the golden calf, giving worship to an idol. His anger burns like fire, and he throws down the tablets of the law. He calls out to God, pleading for mercy on behalf of his people. "They have made a golden calf and have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it," Moses says. "They are a stiff-necked people." But Moses intercedes on behalf of the Israelites, pleading with God to forgive them. He reminds God of His promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And though God's anger is great, He listens to Moses' plea and shows mercy. "I have forgiven them, as you asked," God tells Moses, "but I will not let them go unpunished. They will wander in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies spent exploring the land. And the generation that left Egypt will not enter the promised land, but their children will." And so, the Israelites continue their journey. They wander the wilderness, but they are not alone. God's presence is with them, leading them by a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. They are reminded constantly of His power and His promise to bring them to the land He swore to give them. Every step in the wilderness is a step toward that promise. Every trial is an opportunity to trust God more deeply. The journey is long, and it is hard, but through it all, God is faithful. With every trial He provides, with every need He answers. In the wilderness, the Israelites will learn to trust. They will learn that the God who brought them out of Egypt is the God who will bring them to the promised land. And through their struggles, they will be shaped into a people, not just a group of former slaves, but a nation chosen by God. The wilderness may be harsh, but it is in the wilderness that God refines His people. It is in the wilderness that He teaches them to depend on Him, to trust in His provision, and to look forward with hope to the fulfillment of His promises. This chapter emphasizes the challenges and miracles the Israelites face in the wilderness, highlighting their doubts and God's continued provision. The tension between their grumbling and God's patience with them sets up the spiritual lessons of trust and obedience that will carry them through to the Promised Land. The journey through the wilderness has been long and fraught with challenges, but now the Israelites have arrived at the foot of Mount Sinai. Here they will experience something that will shape their identity as a people forever. The mountain looms before them, towering and mysterious, its peak hidden by thick clouds. This is the place where the God of Israel will speak directly to His people, where He will set apart a nation and reveal His law. For 3 days, the Israelites are told to prepare. They wash their clothes, they purify themselves, and they wait. The air is thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of the divine presence drawing near. Moses leads the people, and he ascends the mountain to meet with God. But they are warned. No one may touch the mountain, for it is holy. The mountain trembles, and a thick cloud descends, darkening the sky. The sound of thunder roars, and the trumpet blasts, growing louder and louder, shaking the very earth beneath them. The people tremble in fear, knowing that something momentous is about to happen. On the 3rd day, Moses ascends the mountain again, this time alone, leaving the people behind at the base. The earth shakes beneath his feet as God's voice calls out to him from the cloud. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. These words resonate through Moses' very soul. The God who spoke to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob now speaks directly to him and to all of Israel. Voice of the Almighty is not just a distant memory. It is present, alive, and powerful. God commands Moses to tell the people that He is making a covenant with them. He will be their God, and they will be His people, a holy nation set apart from the rest of the world. But to live as His people, they must obey His commands. Moses is called up to the summit of Mount Sinai, where he will receive the tablets of the law, God's commandments for the people. But even as he ascends, the people at the base of the mountain are consumed with fear and awe. They see the fire and smoke, and the sound of God's voice shakes them to their core. They know they are in the presence of the Creator of the universe. As Moses reaches the top of the mountain, God gives him the 10 Commandments, moral laws meant to guide His people into righteousness, justice, and holiness. These commandments are not just rules, they are the foundation of Israel's covenant with God. They will serve as the moral compass for generations to come, and they will define the relationship between God and His people. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth below. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, wife, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Each commandment, simple yet profound, speaks to the heart of how God desires His people to live. The 10 Commandments are the laws of love, love for God and love for one's neighbor. They are the foundation of community, the pillars of justice, and the reflection of God's holy nature. As Moses receives these laws, the people wait below, unsure of what is to come. The mountain shakes, and the fear of God is upon them. But they are also filled with hope. God has spoken. He has not abandoned them, and he has shown them the path they must follow to live in his favor. When Moses descends from the mountain, his face shines with the glory of God. The people are afraid to look at him, so bright is his face. Moses covers his face with a veil, but the light of God's presence lingers in him, a testament to the divine encounter he has had. Moses shares with the people the commandments he has received. He tells them that if they obey God's laws, they will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. They will be a beacon of righteousness in the world, and through them, God's glory will shine. The people, filled with awe and reverence, agree to the covenant. They promise to obey the Lord, to follow his laws, and to be faithful to the God who has delivered them from slavery. They agree to live as a holy people, distinct and set apart. But even as the covenant is made, the Israelites will face further tests. Their faith will be tested again and again, and they will falter. Yet the law given at Mount Sinai will remain the foundation of their faith, their identity, and their relationship with God. The 10 Commandments will serve as a guide, a reminder of God's holiness, and his call to his people to live according to his will. The covenant is sealed and seen, not just by the commandments, but by God's presence among them. The people are given instructions for building the tabernacle, a holy place where God's presence will dwell in the midst of them. The journey of Israel as a holy nation has just begun, and their walk with God will shape the course of history. This chapter focuses on the momentous event of receiving the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai, emphasizing the sacredness of the covenant between God and his people, and the profound impact the commandments have on the Israelites' identity and relationship with God. The awe and fear of God's presence, as well as the challenge of obedience, are central themes. The Israelites have received the law, and their journey continues. They are no longer just a group of freed slaves. They are a nation chosen by God to be his people, a kingdom of priests. But despite the promise of a new life, the wilderness remains a harsh and unforgiving place, and the road to the promised land seems longer than ever. Moses, their leader, chosen by God to guide them, finds himself in the midst of a struggle far greater than he ever imagined. The people's complaints are constant, their faith fragile. The burden of leadership weighs heavily on him, and with every step, his patience is tested. The Israelites, once full of hope and gratitude for their deliverance from Egypt, now find themselves longing for the comforts of their past. They are tired, hungry, and thirsty. The wilderness is barren, and their basic needs are often unmet. Their hearts begin to harden, and their trust in Moses and in God begins to wane. "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt," they murmur. "There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Their words cut like daggers. Moses, hearing their cries, goes before God, his heart heavy with frustration. "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant?" Moses cries. "What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me?" The weight of their complaints is too much for him to bear alone. Moses feels abandoned, isolated in his leadership. "Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth?" he asks. "Why did you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their ancestors?" God, in his infinite patience, answers Moses, offering him a solution to the overwhelming burden of leadership. "Bring me 70 of Israel's elders, who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting, that they may stand there with you." God tells Moses to gather the elders of Israel to share in the burden of leadership. These men will help Moses bear the weight of guiding the people. They will judge disputes and provide counsel, allowing Moses to focus on his role as the mediator between God and the people. But the grumbling doesn't end with the appointment of new leaders. The complaints continue. The Israelites begin to remember the food they had in Egypt The abundance they left behind. In their desire for comfort, they demand meat. 2. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. Their longing for Egypt, their yearning for the familiar, clouds their judgment. They forget the pain and suffering they endured as slaves. But their hunger and dissatisfaction drive them to question God's provision. They want more than what God has given them, and in their discontent, they complain again. Moses, feeling the pressure mounting, cries out to God once more. Why have you brought this trouble on me, Lord? Why do you burden me with all these people? Did I conceive them? Did I give them birth? If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me right now if I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. The pain of leadership, the burden of guiding such a stubborn and ungrateful people, becomes too much for Moses to bear. He is at his breaking point. But God, in his mercy, reassures Moses. He tells Moses to gather 70 elders and promises that he will provide meat for the people, not just for one day, not for 2, but for a month. Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, "If only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it." The promise of meat is a sign of God's provision, but it is also a lesson for the people, a lesson that even in their rebellion and ingratitude, God will provide. But he does so not to indulge their desires, but to teach them to trust in his timing and his plan. The meat comes in abundance. Quail are driven into the camp, and the people gather them up, cooking and eating. But as they feast, a plague strikes the people. They had longed for Egypt, for the pleasures of their past, and their desires had led them into sin. The meat they crave becomes a symbol of their discontent. They eat their fill, but the consequences are swift and harsh. The people cry out, but Moses, though grieving, continues to lead them with the strength God provides. Even in the face of their rebellion, Moses remains faithful to the task he was given. He intercedes for the people, asking God to forgive them once again. "I will not carry all these people alone," Moses says. "The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, please take my life." Yet, in this struggle, Moses learns that leadership is not about his own strength or capacity, but about relying on God's strength to sustain him. In their disobedience, in their wandering hearts, the Israelites continue to test Moses' patience and faith. But through it all, Moses remains the leader God has called him to be, and he continues to intercede for the people. And so, the wilderness journey continues, filled with complaints and rebellions, yet also filled with miracles and provision. Through the trials, God's presence remains with his people, guiding them, shaping them, and preparing them to enter the promised land. This chapter delves into the ongoing struggles Moses faces as a leader, highlighting the constant discontent of the Israelites and the emotional toll it takes on Moses. It also showcases God's patience with the people, providing them with what they need despite their constant complaints. The narrative captures the tension between God's provision and the people's inability to trust in it. The years in the wilderness stretch on. The Israelites have traveled far, but they are still not where they long to be. The promised land lies just out of reach, visible but distant, as they continue to wander under the hot desert sun. For 40 years, they will journey, through trials, through miracles, through moments of faith and failure. And through it all, Moses remains their leader. But the weight of leadership grows heavier. Moses, a man who once stood in the palace of Egypt, now stands at the threshold of something greater, a nation called to be set apart, a people destined to enter the land promised to their ancestors. But the cost of leadership is steep. Moses has led them through hardships, through hunger, through rebellion, and yet he still faces challenges that threaten to undo everything. The people continue to complain, their hearts divided, their trust in God wavering. The journey has taken its toll on them, and their hope falters with every step. They grow weary of the endless wandering. Their faith is tested once more. "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness?" they cry. "There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Once again they turn against Moses. Their complaints are endless, their discontent impossible to satisfy, and Moses, weary from the constant burden of their grumbling, takes his frustrations to God. "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant?" Moses cries. "What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me?" But God, ever patient, listens. He continues to provide for his people, sending quail to satisfy their hunger and water from the rock to quench their thirst. Yet the complaints never cease. The people continue to question Moses' leadership, wondering if they are better off returning to Egypt. In the midst of these trials, Moses' leadership is tested to the limit. It is not just the people who are difficult, but the burden of carrying the weight of their doubts and fears. And yet, Moses remains steadfast. He seeks God's guidance. He intercedes for the people, even when they are at their lowest. He pleads with God to forgive them for their lack of faith. One such moment comes when the Israelites, in their frustration and disobedience, are punished with a plague of serpents. The venomous snakes spread throughout the camp, and many are bitten. The people cry out to Moses, acknowledging their sin and asking for deliverance. Moses, ever the intercessor, goes before God on their behalf. "The people have sinned," Moses says. "They have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." God instructs Moses to make a bronze serpent and lift it up on a pole. Anyone who looks at the bronze serpent will be healed. Moses obeys, and the people who look upon the serpent are saved. Through this act, God shows his grace once more. He provides a way of healing for his people, even in the face of their rebellion. Yet the consequences of their sin are still felt, and their journey continues. As the years pass, Moses knows that his time is running out. He will not enter the promised land. He will lead the people to the edge of the land, but it will be another who will take them into it. Moses is told by God that his death is near, and he prepares for the final days of his leadership. In his final moments, Moses speaks to the people of Israel, reminding them of the covenant God has made with them. He urges them to be faithful, to obey the law, and to remember all that God has done for them. He gives a final blessing to the tribes of Israel, imparting his wisdom and love one last time. "The Lord your God has chosen you," Moses says. "You are his people, his treasured possession. Do not be afraid. He will go with you." And so Moses, the great leader, the man who led the Israelites out of Egypt, who stood on Mount Sinai to receive God's law, who interceded for a rebellious people, prepares for the end of his journey. God takes Moses to the top of Mount Nebo, where he looks out across the land of Canaan, the promised land that his people will soon possess. Moses sees it, but he will never set foot in it. His heart is full, for he knows that his mission is complete, that the people will be led to the land that God has promised them. And there, on Mount Nebo, Moses dies. God himself buries him in the land of Moab, but no one knows the exact place of his burial. Moses, the servant of the Lord, is gone. The people mourn his death, for Moses was their leader, their guide, their intercessor. They will never forget the man who led them through the wilderness, who spoke to God face to face, and who gave everything for the people he loved. But even as they mourn, they know that their journey is far from over. The promised land awaits them. And though Moses will not be with them to enter it, his legacy, his leadership, and his faithfulness will live on in the hearts of the people he led. In his final act of leadership, Moses passes the baton to Joshua, his trusted assistant, the man who will lead the Israelites into the promised land. And as the people prepare for the next chapter of their journey, they remember the man who showed them the way, the man who followed God even in the face of immense challenges. Though Moses' journey in this life is over, the legacy of his faith, his obedience, and his leadership lives on in the hearts of Israel and the generations to come. This chapter focuses on Moses' final years as a leader, dealing with the people's continued struggles, his growing weariness, and the eventual acceptance of his death. His leadership is marked by constant intercession for the people, showing his deep commitment to God and the Israelites, despite their frequent rebellion. This chapter ends with the passing of the mantle to Joshua, setting the stage for the next chapter in the history of Israel. The story of Moses, the reluctant leader, comes to a close on the desolate heights of Mount Nebo. His life, filled with moments of doubt and victory, faith and struggle, now fades into the annals of history. But though Moses' physical journey ends in the wilderness, his legacy will endure for generations, shaping not just the nation of Israel, but the very foundations of faith for millions around the world. In the years following Moses' death, the people of Israel, led by Joshua, enter the Promised Land. But the impact of Moses' life and leadership continues to echo throughout the ages. His story becomes a foundational narrative of faith, a testament to the power of obedience, perseverance, and trust in God. The covenant that Moses established between God and the Israelites becomes the cornerstone of Jewish faith and practice. The 10 Commandments received on Mount Sinai remain a moral and spiritual guide, not just for the Israelites, but for all of humanity. They serve as a beacon of justice, righteousness, and divine order. Moses' role as a lawgiver is unmatched. He is not just the leader of the Exodus, he is the one who laid down the framework for God's people to live by. His leadership was not about wielding power for himself, but about guiding a people, sometimes rebellious, often frightened, toward a deeper trust in God. Through his example, the Israelites learn what it means to live as a holy nation, set apart for God's purposes. But Moses' legacy extends beyond the borders of Israel. In Christianity, Moses is revered as a prophet, a precursor to the teachings of Jesus Christ. The law that Moses delivered forms the backdrop for the gospel message, showing the need for redemption and pointing to the coming Savior. His life teaches lessons of faith, of trusting in God's promises, and of the importance of obedience. In Islam, Moses, known as Musa, is considered one of the greatest prophets, a man chosen by God to deliver his message to Pharaoh and lead the Israelites to freedom. His story is a powerful reminder of the struggle against oppression, the need for perseverance, and the power of God's guidance. As the centuries pass, Moses becomes a symbol of faithfulness, a man who overcame his own fears and doubts to become the instrument of God's deliverance. His leadership is not defined by his perfect character, but by his willingness to follow God's calling, even when it was difficult, even when he questioned his own ability. In the years after the Exodus, the Israelites look back on Moses with reverence and awe. He is not just the man who brought them out of Egypt, but the one who taught them how to walk with God. His leadership shows them that God is faithful, that even in the wilderness, even in the hardest times, God will provide. Moses' life is a constant reminder that God's promises are sure, even when the journey is long. Through Moses, the Israelites learn that leadership is not about power or prestige, but about serving God's will. He was a servant leader, one who led with humility, with compassion, and with an unwavering faith in the God who called him. His story teaches all who follow his path that obedience to God, even in the face of great difficulty, will lead to blessings beyond measure. And as generations pass, the legacy of Moses lives on. His story is told and retold, passed down through the generations as a reminder of God's faithfulness, of the power of prayer, and of the strength found in surrendering to God's will. The Israelites are forever shaped by Moses' leadership. The laws he gave them continue to guide them, and his example of faith continues to inspire. Even in the face of his own mortality, Moses' impact endures. His life reminds us that greatness is not measured by how many battles we win or how many titles we hold, but by our willingness to serve, to lead others with integrity, and to follow God's call even when it leads us through the wilderness. Moses' death may have closed one chapter in the story of Israel, but it opened countless others, each one a testament to his faithfulness and to the God who chose him to lead his people. His legacy is not just in the laws he left behind or the nation he built, but in the hearts of the people who carry his story forward, generation after generation. And so the legacy of Moses lives on, not just in the pages of history, but in the hearts of all who seek to walk in the path of faith, trust, and obedience. His life was a journey, but his story is eternal. The man who once stood before Pharaoh as a servant of God now stands as a symbol of faith, strength, and obedience to God's will, forever shaping the history of Israel and the world. This final chapter focuses on Moses' profound legacy, reflecting on how his life and leadership continue to impact not just Israel, but the world at large. It explores how Moses' story influences Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and emphasizes his lasting spiritual impact.